Yeah.
Coronial court now stands resumed. Please begin.
Thank you, Superintendent. I misled you in suggesting that I'm finished, but I will not be long. I'm just going to ask that a photo come up on the screen for you, just to ask for your assistance to help clarify something. Yesterday we heard some evidence. Mr. Bowe took Assistant Commissioner Worst to a text exchange with a particular officer who, an officer I won't name for the moment, but he says this, and for the benefit of my friends, it's in the text messages at 6406. It's to Constable Rolfe, and he says, well, fuck me, I'm having to answer more questions about an incident over a year ago. Some turd claimed I knocked him off his push bike with 301 and then roughed him up. Only person to get roughed up was me, as I got dragged on my face as he was trying to run away. All seems well, but they now have a hard-on over the fact that I used 301 to try and block him in. They're now asking a fourth lot of questions. I think they pick someone and then just pick on them, finding my breaking point maybe. And then the reply from Constable Rolfe was, over a year ago, ? Fuck they're gay cunts. Yeah, they just find a name and go for you, over and over. Fuck them, just let them waste time, and then if they ever have enough evidence, just stress leave until they let go. Seems what everyone else does. Can I ask firstly for your clarification to see if you can assist us? 301, that's a photo of a vehicle which has been taken by the officer in charge of this investigation, Superintendent Morgan. Are you familiar with that vehicle?
Yes, certainly.
And that 301 is a call sign of a police car, is that
Correct.
right?
So that's a marked general duties police vehicle. It's 301 that's allocated to the shift sergeant as part of the operational Alice Springs operational fleet.
Are you aware, that can come down now, are you aware of an officer in the Alice Springs command who had a complaint made against him for pushing somebody off their push bike with a police car, 301?
No awareness at all.
If a complaint of that nature was made, it would be entirely legitimate that it be looked at by PSC, is that right?
Yes, certainly. It would form part of that CMT process that we talked about before, and looked at either by PSC in their own right or by the command oversighted by PSC and the Ombudsman's office. So,
What do you, without a complaint, given that information that's contained, would it be appropriate now for there to be some investigation around what was happening at about the time of that text message or preceding that text message?
Your Honour, good question. I'm certainly not aware of the facts within this matter, but certainly, so a disciplinary investigation is one or two things. It's one's either complaint against police or an internal investigation. So an internal investigation are investigations that could be undertaken the own motion of the police service by a prescribed officer operating within a command or by PSC.
What's the relevance of that complaint process and internal investigation process in terms of maintaining confidence in the police force?
Again, it's critical. It's the notion, I guess, that police investigating police brings with that a degree of suspicion by the community, but the checks and balances that are inherent within the process, namely the oversight by the Ombudsman's office, the independence of the Professional Standards Command, is the checks and balances necessary to make sure that there's confidence in both complaint investigation and in internal investigations.
It's critical to the confidence the public can have in a police force, isn't it, that they know that there is an effective and functioning complaint process?
Yes.
And one that has integrity, do you
Yes.
agree? And do you think it's important in terms of the discipline of the force that officers respect that process?
Yes.
Have you ever heard of officers going off on stress leave until the command or the PSC let an investigation go?
That's a difficult question for me to answer. It's we have a system whereby, a medical system whereby we have quite generous, is probably not the right term, but it's all I can think of at the moment, generous sick leave provisions. They're applied by many people around PTSD and mental health related issues. Generally speaking, it's those injuries that you can't see that bring about substantial periods of absence from the workforce. I suspect, given my role and experience, that there is a degree of exploitation of that across the service, and I suspect that some people that are the subject of disciplinary matters, notwithstanding that I acknowledge that inherent within that is a degree of stress associated with that process, but I do accept or suspect that there is some abuse of that.
And it jeopardises the whole system, doesn't it, if you have officers who are willing to abuse it like that?
Yes.
Do you know I would draw that. Can I ask you to have a look at that photograph of the exchange of text messages that I just read to you? And Superintendent, without revealing the identity of the person who messages Constable Rolfe about the complaint made against him or knocking somebody off their bike, do you know the rank of that person?
Either acting sergeant or substantive sergeant. I don't think higher than that.
It's extremely disappointing, though, isn't it, to have a sergeant or either acting or substantive in a message exchange with a constable who's complaining about having had a complaint made or having to answer a complaint.
Agreed.
And then that sergeant knowing that the response from a young officer is to the effect, if they've got enough evidence, just stress leave until they let it go. It's extremely disappointing, isn't it, that you've got a sergeant participating in that exchange?
That's the leadership deficit that I was talking about before, but yes.
If you've got the text messages bundle that I showed you, could you have a look at page 6? Do you see there that same sergeant, either acting or substantive, is involved in a text exchange with Constable Rolfe on the 3rd of September 2019, so less than a month before Kumanjayi's death, where he says, "Sorry about the stress caused by losing my shit the other night. Stress you didn't need. You sorted it well. I'd just had enough. He was the second person to press my button that night." And we don't know what he meant by that. No doubt we'll be informed when that person comes to explain it in their evidence. Constable Rolfe replies, "Bro, there was literally no stress about it. I'm all for that shit. I've done the same thing to you more than once before. I'm always ready to make my camera face the other way and be a dramatic cunt for the film. Ha ha." And then that sergeant replies, "And the Oscar goes to," and Constable Rolfe replies, "Ha ha." Do you agree with me that the clear inference to be drawn from that exchange is joking about the misuse of body-worn video evidence?
Correct, coupled with excessive force.
And what do you have to say about that in terms of, firstly, the leadership deficit that you were talking about?
Well, clearly, it demonstrates quite clearly a leadership deficit, but also has a tendency to compromise the integrity of our framework and the integrity of our agency and the regard that we're held in by the community.
To undermine the evidence that then is available to the coroner, for example?
Certainly, yes.
And available to other judges in the Northern Territory who are called on to determine whether or not there has been an excessive use of force in some instances.
Agreed.
And it undermines the public confidence in the police force, or has that possibility. Do you agree?
Agreed.
finally, just in relation to what I was asking you before the break, I was referring you to evidence that, and I'm reading from the Proctor report at page 97, on Monday evening, so that's the 11th of November, a social gathering occurred at Constable Rolfe's residence. The gathering included members of Rolfe's patrol group, police friends and fellow IRT members who had been at Yuendamu with Constable Rolfe when the shooting occurred. The next morning, on Tuesday the 12th of November, Constable Rolfe, in the company with his legal representative, read a statement to investigators in Alice Springs indicating he would not be discussing the matter further. So we know that a social gathering occurred the night before involving his patrol group, police friends and fellow IRT members who had been in Yuendamu with Constable Rolfe when the shooting occurred. With all that information, I'll just repeat my question to you earlier. What do you say about that in terms of the breach of the general order?
Well, it's clearly made out, and the real consequence of that is, again, eroding community confidence, bringing the agency in disrepute and compromising any assessment of these matters, whether it's through the coronial or criminal lens.
Those are my questions, Your Honour.
Ms Moreau, just before we come to you, Officer, can I ask this? Before being exposed to those text messages, would you have imagined that there were police who held those views or spoke in that way to each other?
Yes, Your Honour, and I'm surprised and disappointed that some of the people I know there in respect were engaged in such dialogue.
You wouldn't have expected that before you saw those text messages?
No.
So they surprised you?
Yes.
And that was happening under your nose, so to speak?
Correct, Your Honour.
Given that you were not aware of that and it was reasonably closely connected to you, are you concerned that there might be other similar views being expressed by other police officers that the hierarchy are not aware of?
I'm not sure what to think, Your Honour, in that regard. Surprised by this, and I still strongly believe that that we are a professional agency, notwithstanding, and I like to hope that this is isolated, but I don't know what tomorrow can say.
I suppose that says that you hope that it's isolated, but you can't be certain.
Certainly not. I can't definitively say anything in that regard.
And would you encourage other police, if they're aware of this kind of views being exchanged, to come forward so that these matters can be dealt with?
Certainly, and when you say dealing with it, it's not only just dealing with it, it's changing the culture. It's reasserting what it is that we should be doing and the manner in which we engage respectfully with our community. It's the cornerstone of everything we do. So, yes, certainly.
So do you think there's been any reaching out or communication to the broader police force that they are encouraged to come forward if there are these kinds of issues and that they will be supported if they do that?
Yeah, I like to think that that is the case, that the membership are aware that if they come forward they would be supported. I do acknowledge though the inherent difficulties in that as a constable by constable level, particularly if we're talking about this disparity in rank, so a junior member reporting the conduct of a senior member. So the inherent in the rank structure makes it difficult in that regard. So, but I'd like to think that, again, we're a police service that take an oath to serve and protect. Inherent in that is maintaining the confidence of the community, and we, irrespective of what rank we have the courage to go, I'm happy to call out what I've seen and it's not acceptable or condoned by me, and that sort of adage that thrown around in terms of the conduct you walk past is the conduct you condone. So, I'd like to think that, broadly speaking, there is that degree of courage across the membership to call it out and hold people accountable.
If there's a message going out that this behaviour, the belief is that this behaviour is isolated, do you think that's encouraging people to think that they could come forward safely?
Sorry, I didn't understand your question, Your Honour, sorry.
If there's a message going out that there's a belief that this behaviour is in fact isolated, do you think that expressing that belief is encouraging people to come forward if they don't agree with that belief, or do you think that might have the effect of perhaps suppressing people willingly coming forward if they're aware of other examples of this kind of behaviour?
So I interpret your question to say if the prevailing finding is that it's not systemic or widespread, that gives people an out in terms of reporting it. Is that the interpretation of your question?
No, it's more about the messages that are going out to the police. And I'm just wondering if the messaging that's going out is a belief that this is in fact isolated. I'm wondering if that perhaps has the effect of stifling people, police, from coming forward if in fact they are able to provide information of other examples of this kind of behaviour.
Again, I'd like to say no. I'd like to say that, broadly speaking, the courage of the workforce is and the values that are held by the large proportion of the workforce is challenge and not walk past unacceptable behaviour and call it out for what it is.
Now that you've seen these text messages, whilst you might previously have hoped and believed that these views were not held among certain police officers, are you now finding that belief might be challenged?
Yes, Your Honour.
Yes, Ms Moreau?
Before that occurs, Your Honour, I'd like to ask an indulgence. Would you extend the matter down for 5 minutes? There's a matter that is important that I speak with counsel to speak about.
Sure.
We'll never get to your question. That's okay, then I'll have to read it.